Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining West Island for lunch on this Friday afternoon. And thanks for joining us. We know it's a busy day for many of you. So it's our pleasure at West Island to introduce Dr. Michael Eason to you. Dr. Michael Eason is an experienced psychologist. He has provided psychotherapy to adults and teenagers across a wide range of issues. And what we've asked Dr. Michael Eason to talk to us today about is managing teen risks and addictions and substance abuse. He's worked with lots of young people and adults relating to addiction and substance abuse. And we're delighted he could give up some time during his day to be with us. So, Michael, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm going to turn my video off and put myself on mute, and I'll see you at the end. And parents, if you do have any questions, maybe wait till maybe 5 minutes or so before the end of the presentation. But if you do have some questions, please put them on there and we'll address them at the end. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Yes. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me during your busy day to have lunch together and do some lunch and learn. So as Claire said, I'm a psychologist working in private practice here in Hong Kong. Here in Central, I've been here 8 years and worked with a lot of the school systems. So I have a pretty good lay of the land. And one of the groups I work a lot with is teens and young adults. We're here at Lifespan Counseling in Central. So we have an array of different services here for all age groups, including the academic consulting and things of that nature. So I see a lot of teens with various different reasons coming through our doors. I think the topic of, obviously the topic of substance abuse is very relevant. It's going to be our focus today. And as Claire said, just sort of, kind of marinate in some of the questions, and I want to kind of power through the slides so we'll have time at the end to do a collaborative kind of dialogue, because I know you will have some specific questions. So, and of course, feel free to email me afterwards. You'll have my contact information. All right, so let me start by discussing a little bit of terminology. Get my thing going, 1 second. Yes, here we go. So, substance abuse and addiction. First of all, we actually need to know how it is defined. So, a couple of things. Substance abuse is defined as excessive use of a drug or using a drug without a medical reason. And sometimes teenagers aren't aware. They think, well, this is a prescription. This is a legal substance. It's okay. It's legal. But it's not, right? If the prescription is not in your name, they shouldn't be using it. So some teenagers may share medications, maybe if it's ADHD medication or something like cough syrup, which we'll talk about later. So substance abuse is also, can be prescription drugs. It can be legal drugs. The timing is good for this conversation because, just I think it was last week or the last couple of weeks, Hong Kong released some information, some statistics about drug abuse. Good news and bad, mostly bad, I think. So, but overall drug use has decreased, but young drug abuse, young abusers under the age of 21, that has gone up by 47%. So that's a significant number. So the overall trend is okay, but the trend for teenagers, young adults is worse. Young adults account for 43% of the newly reported drug users. Cannabis use up by 58%. Ketamine 94%, which is interesting. I don't see much of that in my own private practice, but it's ketamine is a tranquilizer, but it's used as a party drug, sort of a euphoric drug for teenagers or young adults. Arrests are going up, and specifically people being arrested under the age of 21 by 50%. So I think the police force is sort of being more vigilant about this. I personally know people, clients or, people who know people who talk, and arrests are going up. People are getting caught more often and the punishments are more severe. So the government reiterated that age is not a mitigating factor for sentencing, which meaning that they may not give you a lesser sentence just because you're a minor. So those kind of days are maybe in the past. So these are just some statistics to kind of put it into perspective. And another statistic is a bit older. What is this, 2012 or so? But it's just showing that it is a consistent trend that young people under the age of 21 or the biggest proportion of new drug users. This has been going on for a decade now. It's particularly a problem because the earlier you start using, the more riskier it is. So for teenagers and young adults to use, it's far more substantial, the impact on the brain, than if you're using as an adult. Individuals who use it as juveniles are at a higher risk of becoming addicted later in life, because at this age, there's the incomplete development of the teenage brain, especially that part that controls impulses and risk assessment and thinks about the future. That part of the brain is just not fully developed. So young people don't have the ability to appropriately assess risk. And that's why we, as the adults in their life, have to sort of mitigate for that. While being compassionate towards them, but their brain just isn't there yet, but also helping guide them. So yes, so actually age 25 is what they say, is sort of the final age for brain development. You may see age 23, 24, 25, something like that, but that prefrontal cortex is still developing until our early to mid 20s. It's interesting. So let me look here briefly. The most commonly used drugs we have are, of course, the typical ones: alcohol, tobacco, which is nicotine, and the marijuana, which is cannabis. I'll talk a little bit also more about nicotine because of the rise in vaping and e-cigarettes. So we'll get to that on a later slide. There are many reasons that teenagers will use drugs, even if they're aware of the consequences or the dangers. So I think what's important, one of the things I want you to walk away from this conversation today is to get an understanding of how the teenage brain works. Because in order to sort of persuade them or to educate them, you have to do it from their point of view. It has to be relevant to them, because these kind of fear-mongering drugs are bad, they don't tend to work. So anyway, they use, for simple reasons, relief of boredom. And that's why I often spend a lot of time teaching kids the difference between the positive coping and negative coping skills. We're going to have boredom. We're going to have depression. We're going to have stress and anxiety as part of school and the pressure. There are positive ways to cope. And then here's some of the negative ways. Drugs and alcohol are obviously some negative ways of coping if you're managing your emotions through substances, versus exercise, which gets you the sort of positive, endorphins and the dopamine, socializing, playing sports. We want to accentuate the positive things they can do, and sort of, not focus on these sort of negative coping things, but be aware if they are coping in negative ways. Another reason is obviously peer influence, or to identify with peers. So it's not just peer pressure, it's about finding, trying to fit in, trying to have a tribe, and trying to have a source of identity. And the third thing is basically just you're curious or you want to get high, because they know, teenagers know that people use drugs for a reason. There is something good about them. There's a good feeling. There's that being high. So it doesn't serve us well to not acknowledge that the reason that people use this, because you can't have the euphoria, you can't have a high. And teenagers are curious about that. They're curious what that feels like. So we'll talk about that. So of course, adolescence is a time of experimentation and trying new things. Hopefully we try to channel them towards healthy experimentation. So just as a review, experimentation, fun, sometimes lack of parental guidance can also be a reason teens use, feeling that pressure from the school, meaning academic pressure, the exams, all that kind of stuff, preparing for college, and lack of education about the dangers of drugs and the potential for addiction. That's why it's so important to have some sort of training at home or in the schools. I'll go into the schools sometimes here at West Island and other schools to do a similar presentation geared towards the teenagers and the adolescents in different age groups, just so they are aware of the different drugs and what impact they have on the body, so that they are informed. They will be faced with these decisions, so they need to be informed with the information so they can make a healthy decision for them. Okay, but still empowering them to make a they have to make a decision. Attention, sometimes kids use for attention. I know it's negative attention, but it's still attention. All right, addiction, to give a little bit more terminology, addiction is actually a Latin term. It's kind of like enslaved by or bound to a certain substance or behavior. So there are two types of addictions. There's the substance addictions, which everyone is familiar with, alcohol, cocaine, etc. But then we have the process addictions, which are the behavior addictions, which are becoming more and more prevalent. Behavioral addictions like, online gaming, right? The video games, the internet addiction, gambling, exercise, all these kind of shopping. These are behavior addictions. So we want to know that we've got the substance addictions, but we also want to recognize that behaviors or activities can also become addictions. Okay. Regardless, if it's a behavior or a substance, it kind of works the same way in the brain. So as a brief overview of that, it's talking about addiction is a form of learning, and it changes the way the brain works, and it changes the neurotransmitters in the brain. So we think of it, well, most psychologists think of it as in the form of like an addiction. I would use that word, as a disease. Addiction is a brain disease. It's about the dopamine, this neurotransmitter in the brain called dopamine, which is kind of in the reward center of the brain. So your brain releases this neurotransmitter when its pleasure center is activated. So good food, a nice meal, exercise, all releases dopamine, as does a line of Coke or a glass of wine or marijuana, all releases dopamine. Okay, so what happens is these addictive substances or drugs flood the brain with dopamine. You get that rush, you get that high, and it's altering how the brain looks and how the brain functions. And then what happens is over time, your brain knows, hey, when I feel bored, when I feel stressed, the quickest way out of it is to smoke, or the quickest way out of it is to drink, or what have you. So your brain learns, you're conditioning your brain that when you feel unpleasant, hey, here's the best way, here's the quickest way out of it. So initially you have the power. Yeah, the first one or two times you make a choice to use this substance or whatever, but at a certain point, because of the rewiring and the dopamine, the addiction takes over and you kind of lose your freedom to choose. The addiction takes over. And that's an angle I talk a lot with teenagers, because teenagers don't like this authority. Teenagers don't like not being in control. So one way to think about it is these substances take over. Like they become in control of you. You're not in control of them. You're not in control of the drugs. And they tend to respond to that sort of narrative, okay, which is true. Adolescents, again, particularly dangerous. The brain is still developing. Teenagers, they're risk takers. They do not have a good perception of the risk versus reward assessment. So they're shaping their brains at this age. I like to think of them, what do I call them? Architects? Yeah, I like to think of them as architects. So they're setting the foundation of what their brain will become in their 20s or their 30s. They're doing that. So actually they have so much power. They have so much responsibility and power as a teenager to determine their future self. And pointing that out is sometimes helpful, that they have that. And what they put in their system right now is either going to sort of be detrimental to their future development, or be sort of fertilizing and setting a good foundation for their future. Adolescent addiction, yes, it is a problem. We've seen the recent stats. So I'll go through 3 or 4 of the common substances, just so you have an idea of what they do in the body. I think we're all familiar with alcohol as the oldest and most widely used drug in the world for sheer accessibility. And especially in Hong Kong, with the drinking ages 18. I'm from the US, where it's 21. Parts of Europe, it's much lower, right? So I'm sure we'll have some questions about that. But we all know how alcohol affects the body, and the judgment, the confusion, and alcohol poisoning, things of that nature. I think it's interesting to look at the terminology of binge drinking. For us as adults as well, this can also be interesting. So what's considered a binge is different for men and women because of different metabolic rates. 5 or more drinks on a single occasion for men is considered a binge, and 4 or more for women, that's considered binge drinking. And heavy alcohol use is considered doing that on 5 or more days within a month. So for a man to have 5 or more drinks, 5 or more days in the past month, we consider heavy alcohol drinking or problematic drinking. So this applies, just FYI. And then what is that? What is 5 drinks? What is the quantity? Well, this is what's considered standard drink, 12 ounces of beer or 5 ounces of wine, something like that, right? So this is what we're talking about. And I don't know if it's interesting for you at working with teenagers, but also for us as adults to kind of gauge our own drinking patterns and what we are exposing our children or teenagers to in the home. When we're drinking at home, first of all, it's legal for us to drink as adults, and we're not, drinking more than the recommended amount, something like that. So setting that, because teens may ask, well, you do it, why can't I? And here are some of the reasons, right? It's legal, and we're drinking not above the recommended amount, et cetera, et cetera. We can talk about that later. So that's alcohol. Cocaine is obviously a stimulant, elevating the heart, elevating the breath and blood, all that stuff's going up, risk of diseases, etc., physical damage. Cocaine is especially, unfortunately, some teenagers are using this. I know I can think of 3 or 4 at the top of my head. So cocaine is much more risky because it does carry the possibility of catastrophic consequence. If you don't know if you have an underlying cardiac condition, you don't know first ever line of cocaine can be your last. So I'm especially cautious of anyone, if I get wind that anyone as a teenager is using this, we need to be vigilant. Another thing that's pretty rough or pretty prevalent in Hong Kong, unfortunately, is cough syrup. I don't know if you are aware, but and you can look over all the problems that it causes. Obviously, we don't need to be taking large doses of cough syrup, but kids are getting this, coating cough syrup over the counter, mixing it with Sprite or lemonade or whatever they have, and just drinking it. Incredibly dangerous, right? So we want to be aware of what medicines we have in the home. If you find bottles of cough syrup, obviously they're hiding under the mattress or something like that. There's different lingo, different terminology. They call it lean, L-E-A-N. So another thing, just be mindful what language they're using. So they may be talking about using drugs right in front of you, but they're using these kind of code words you're not always aware of. So this has become recently, I don't know, in the past year or so, I've seen more and more teenagers abusing cough syrup in this way. Marijuana, of course, always a favorite, right? So again, while we think it calms us down, in some ways it does cognitively, it is also a stimulant, meaning that it stimulates the heart rate, it stimulates the blood pressure. So everything in the body is going up. While you may feel relaxed here, you're not relaxed physiologically, you're not relaxed. Paranoia, hallucinations, etc., memory problems, IQ scores lower, and the lung issue, lots of negative things. Again, none of this is when I'm talking to the kids, I'm not telling them like, here are all the bad things. I'm saying, here's what it does to the body. Yes, there are reasons, there are positive consequences, positive benefits to smoking, but here are the bad things, right? Not to mention the fact that it's illegal, first and foremost, in Hong Kong, which we can address later. So tobacco, of course, everyone knows tobacco, nicotine, the dangers of nicotine, also stimulant, speeds up everything in the body, severe withdrawal symptoms. So someone's smoking, vaping, if they get their vape taken away from them, the next day they're severely in withdrawal, anxiety, anger, insomnia, restlessness, and what have you. So I want to talk briefly about the vaping, because it's also a problem, a trend, I guess, in Hong Kong. It is not safe to vape. It's still dangerous. Some people think that it's better than smoking. there are pros and cons, but it's still not a good thing. So what are the reasons why kids are vaping? Well, they might see a friend or family member using it, so it's sort of modeled for them. Also, there's the taste. I don't know how much you know about that, but these things are so targeted towards youth and students. You know, I was talking to someone earlier this week, and he said, "Oh, my favorite flavor is peach." You know, like they get peach, they get Coca-Cola, they get, you know, chocolate and candy flavor. So these sort of tobacco companies are obviously targeting them as young adults, so they have a built-in customer base when they become adults. It's kind of manipulative. It's good marketing, I suppose, but so that's another thing I point out to the teenagers, that you know, these companies are trying to hook you. Again, you lose control and then you become their best customer, etc. So I think another thing about the e-cigarettes, they are going up. They produce chemicals, because you're burning nicotine. They do produce chemicals that are toxic when you're vaping them. So it's not that it may be different from what you're inhaling from cigarette smoke, but you're still inhaling things that are not helpful, that are harmful for you. They also contain, to my knowledge, they contain higher quantity of nicotine, so you get addicted more quickly. And there's this thing called cross addiction. Cross addiction is where if someone has been addicted to one substance at some point in their lives, they're more likely to get addicted to a different substance. So if as a teenager with this young, sensitive, not fully formed brain, you already learn what addiction is, as an adult, you've already got that proclivity or that vulnerability to be addicted to something else as you get older. So it's not an innocent thing here. I mean, nicotine does have risk. Okay. Other consequences, because again, you want to talk to teenagers, well, I'm calling them kids, teenagers. It has to be something that impacts them. They live in the now. So, well, okay, so yeah, drugs are bad. They don't necessarily interested in liver disease or, you know, heart disease. They're interested in, how does it impact me? How does it impact my day-to-day life? Because we can talk about your sports performance, right? These vaping has bad on the lungs. I talked to several teenagers. It decreases their stamina, so it impairs your sports performance. Embarrassing behavior. Everything going out at LKF, something like that. People get intoxicated. It's filmed. Everything is on social media. It leads to a lot of embarrassing behavior. There's a lot of sort of bullying or people being, you know, caught on social media, which can lead to, of course, being expelled at school as a severe case or a legal case. But lesser than that, can just lead to really embarrassing videos and pictures of you, grades, how you look, how you feel, social problems. Again, substance controls you. You lose control of your decisions in life. The drugs take over. The drugs hijack your reward system. So I try to use this sort of to talk about it, to make it relevant to them at their age, right? Okay. So briefly, or as a recap, sorry, some of the reasons I think we already discussed. Why teenagers do it is the basic boredom, curiosity, distraction, peer pressure. But there's also these two, this idea of doing something that's prohibited. There's something appealing about that, and this form of rebellion, which teenagers like to do, rebel or prohibit. So the point of this is, by talking about drugs, you're not encouraging them to do it, or you're not putting the idea in their head, because it's already there. They're already aware of these things. And I think to normalize it in a way, talking about it openly in the culture, in the school, is the way of making it more, I don't know, normalized. So if we prohibit it or hide it, they're going to be more curious about it, rather than just taking it out of the shadows and saying, here's what it is, here's what these things are, here's what they do. Teenagers might be less curious, less tempted. Okay, so all right, I want to, because some parents might be interested in what are the symptoms, what are the signs that my teenager might be using. And here are some things. Extreme changes in mood, okay, sleeping more or less than usual or at different times, changes in energy levels, weight loss, weight gain. And you might be thinking this is a typical teenager. I get it, but the thing is, you know your child. So what we're really looking for is behavior that is atypical or behavior that's out of norm for your child. So if your child is suddenly sleeping more, eating more, it's changes in their behavior that's not normal for them. Be alert to that. Secretiveness, lying, these are kind of hallmarks of all addictive behaviors. Stealing money from you, purse, wallet, having large amounts of cash. Unfortunately, maybe they've gotten to selling, or maybe they're dealing and they have a lot of cash. I'll be curious about it. Or if you're losing cash, or you're losing taking pills out of your own pill cabinets. Changes in social groups, new friends, unusual friends, going out at weird times of the day or night, drug paraphernalia in the room, obviously pipes, cigarette papers, stashes of paper, foil, or full foil packaging, they wrap it up. These kind of things you want to look for, you want to be aware of. Not that, obviously we give some privacy, but we want to be aware of these kind of things if they're sort of, if the kids have them. Withdrawal signs. So how do you know if maybe someone's been using things and they stop? The most typical withdrawal signs are irritability, anxiety, and insomnia. But you'll also have things like restlessness, craving, depression, shake or tremble, heart palpitations. I mean, withdrawal is vicious, kind of a beast, and that's why when you withdraw, the easiest way to get out of withdrawal is to use the substance again. So that's why it hooks you in that way. If it's nicotine or something like that, these will pass. If you have actual alcohol withdrawal, or that may have need some medical treatment, right? Okay, so I want to just briefly look at some strategies, and I want to save some time for the Q&A. These are just some of the things I talk about with teenagers about developing self-esteem, and you can talk about them really well. Setting boundaries, being assertive. If you want to say no, say no. We always want to make people aware of the consequences, because again, the teenage brain doesn't always think about consequences. It's really focused in the now. Maybe giving them a script in their head for how to handle these tricky situations. What do I say? What do I do? And have an idea. Here's what I'm going to say when I'm in a situation where someone's tempting me. I'm not going to do that. I'd really get in trouble at school. We have a policy at our school. I'm not going to do that. My parents would just, whatever they need to say, but they can work out a script, and you can work with them on that. And alternatives to doing drugs, all these kind of things that teenagers can do to sort of stop it. These last two on the slide, I'm talking about therapy techniques. So I know mindfulness is a lovely thing, and it's being taught in some of the schools to just pause between someone, before they react, they sort of stop and think about it, and they can respond instead of reacting to it. We also know there's an acronym I like to use, HALT, HALTBS. We're more likely to make unwise decisions when we're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed. If you look at this, teenagers are often one or all these things all at once, bored, stressed. So that just means they're more vulnerable to kind of self-soothe maybe about negative things. So we can stop and ask ourselves, wait a minute, do I really want to smoke right now? Do I really want to drink, or am I just bored? And if I'm bored, what else can I do? What's an alternative? Something like that, right? So here are some resources. The Surgeon General website in the US is great resources. This is just for E6, but they have other things. Well, Kids Health, there's lots of good resources. And I will say, obviously we couldn't go over everything today, but I appreciate you joining me for lunch. Feel free if you have any questions, of course, to email me here at Lifespan. Myself and other colleagues are happy to help. So, and I will have a discussion with everyone. So I'll put it back over to Claire. If you can open that up and we can have a little dialogue, see what kind of feedback we got from today.
Thanks, Michael. Really good, very comprehensive. And we've got quite a number of parents joining us now. Just while people, if you want to put a question in the Q&A, please do now. And we've got a little bit of time just to take some questions. So please start that Q&A going. But Michael, while parents are just thinking about those questions, I thought quite an interesting one we got in before the webinar was, what approach should a parent take when your children are traveling to a country that allows drugs like marijuana?
Yeah, I thought about that, and then I I just looked at the question this morning, but well, first of all, for good or better or worse, we're not really traveling, so we have some time to figure this out. But
Yeah.
In my experience, even in countries where marijuana is legal, it's still not legal for teenagers or young. I still think there's some sort of a limit on the age at which people can buy substances. Unless I'm wrong. I mean, is that correct, or do you know?
Sorry, say that one again.
I think even if it's legal, there's still an age limit.
Yeah.
That's not
right.
Legal for a 12-year-old. It may be legal when you're 18.
Yeah. And I think it's having, it's what you went back to before about having a open conversation, isn't it? And normalizing that conversation and really using it as an opportunity to talk about the ramifications of those countries. I know Canada's having some real issues since it has been legalized. The more research that's been done on the brain and the cause and the causes and the consequences of addictions. So it's a great opportunity to talk about the pros and cons, but then also bring it into what you were saying, is these are the effects that these drugs can have. And we've got some questions coming in, Michael, and good one to start with. Can a student cheat the hair test? Do you have any information on that? So if we'd advise a student to do a drugs test and they do the hair test, I believe it's the most reliable one.
That would be difficult to cheat. I mean, because it has to take several weeks to. I would find there are ways to get around maybe a urine test or something like that, but a hair test would take a lot of effort, is my understanding, right? So they all have all these sort of ideas that if I drink this or if I take these supplements and this kind of thing, but it's no guarantee. It's one of the most comprehensive ones.
Yeah, agreed. And another parent saying, Michael, what do you know about muscle spray?
Nope, it's not my area. I can't really. Do you know anything about muscle sprays?
I have come across a very, very small group that you hear on the Hong Kong vibe or across in other countries, that some young people experiment with muscle spray because of the chemicals contained within this spray. Probably maybe not directly, but similar to a glue sniff, where you'd sniff the chemicals within it. I think it's a damp cloth and you spray it in. Don't know too much about that, Massa, but we can find out. And if you do know anything else, do share that with us.
So that's more like an aerosol. That's a different question.
Yeah.
People talking about. It's not about sports enhancement drugs. Is also a different.
Yeah. And Annie, one not for Michael, but for me. Yes, we do provide a similar talk for students, and Michael has actually spoken to our year 10 students, all of them, about substance abuse, which has been very, very positively received by the students actually. And we do talk to our young people as early as year 8 actually, about substance misuse. So I think we're moving to have these conversations earlier, and as Michael said, to open up the conversation.
Well, Claire, I think those statistics, those recent statistics are very kind of alarming.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think tying into a question from Sophie here, which is regarding the increase. Why has drug use increased so much recently, while they were getting less together? They were more contained. Do they take it more on their own or in groups, and where is it likely to happen? So I think a couple of questions there. Why is it increased while students were probably more restricted is the first one.
They're more restricted. Yeah, also there are ways around that. Rates of substance abuse and addiction have spiked during COVID. So during the past 18 months or so, globally, we've seen much higher rates of this, because think about it, boredom, loneliness, uncertainty, all these kind of triggers for substance abuse have been just skyrocketing. The triggers are everywhere. So even if they're not able to get together, but which they still have been able to do that, at least in small groups or meeting their friend here and there. Unfortunately, I think COVID has had the impact of maybe more people experimenting alone as opposed to in groups. So I think that has been happening as well. So not just with teenagers, but also with adults, the numbers of substance abuse have just, there's been more people using substances. How should I say? There's more people using substances for the first time during COVID, and people who have pre-existing addictions, they have increased or relapsed. There's been more relapses. People who were sober for a while have relapsed during the pandemic. So it's been a tough time.
Yeah, it really has. And I really like your acronym, the hungry, lonely, tired, bored and stressed. And I think boredom would have a lot to do with why young people have been experimenting more, stress, and also whilst they've been working online during the day, probably after hours, maybe, I'm just guessing, having time on their own, maybe a little bit more freedom, because parents feel that their children need a bit of a break, probably hanging around with a mixed group of peers, maybe different age ranges as well. Maybe there's been more opportunity because activities haven't been on offer. So again, it goes back to your lovely acronym, that students are just looking for other ways to get some relief from the stresses they're feeling, rather than getting out there on the court or on the pitch. And again, just having those open conversations and with your child about it. So good questions. And I think, as you said, Michael, it depends. It can be on their own, it can be in groups. I know the statistics we got from the drug survey, the last one, was that young people are more likely to experiment with drugs with friends than any other group. So, and that's what you were saying about the peer pressure and giving young people a phrase or something that they can say when they're in a situation with people, with friends of friends, and people that they really like or that they find are funny. And I think that's one of the hardest situations.
They need to have that script prepared, right? Because they're those friends and they trust their friends, they like their friends, they don't want to be an outcast. But once they say no, once or twice, most people, what I understand is peer pressure, the way we traditionally think of it, isn't really, so someone says no once or twice and they develop, okay, this is our buddy here who doesn't smoke, and they will accept that as part of who you are. If you can just build your brand or build your identity as, I'm someone who doesn't smoke, and then they will stop the pressuring. But you do need to be who you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. And a good question here on any advice how parents should ideally deal with suspect behaviour. How do you open up to a teenager to get them to talk about it, Michael?
I think it's a tough question. I think sometimes out of the caring and concerned, parents may overreact or come across overly punitive, or the first time maybe the kid comes home, maybe smell alcohol or some red eyes or something like that. So that's actually an opportunity to kind of approach them with care and curiosity, more so than this kind of, the reaction is sort of this catastrophic punishment reaction. Obviously, if it's sort of, a pattern of behavior, that's a different discussion. But if it's sort of the first time and you want to, say, oh, I noticed these sort of symptoms. I noticed you're acting in a certain way. Have you taken something? And because I'm worried, I'm worried about you, and let's have a discussion about this. Again, once it's a pattern of behavior, that's a different topic. But I think I've talked to some teenagers who are so fearful of their parents' reactions, negative reactions, they will hide it even more, or they will stay out, or they will put themselves at more risk just to avoid getting in trouble. So I think, at least for the first time, I think because that can almost traumatize a kid. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, Claire.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the most challenging aspects of parenting, if you do know that your child may have started to experiment early on, or maybe started vaping. And I think our reaction sometimes, because we love our children, is we might get cross because we want that that anger is about being protective, isn't it? And about wanting to get them to stop. But actually, you know, you were talking before about young people stopping and breathing before they respond. And I think as parents, we have to do the same. And I think it's taking a moment to think about the difference between reacting and responding. And it doesn't mean you have to respond there and then. I mean, it might be an evening where you've been out and you've come in and your children have come in, and it might not be the best time to speak to them. So I think you have to choose your moment. I think what you said was perfect. You approach it with care and curiosity, because it's in that moment that that young person will decide whether they want to open up with you a bit more or they're going to close in. And then their friends become the people they open up to, and those friends might be the ones they're experimenting with. So, yeah.
Well, really, you're absolutely right. And if they come home and they're clearly a little bit inebriated or something like that, probably they need to go to bed, and they're not going to be in a headspace to have a conversation with you at that point. You're going to be angry, you're going to be upset, they're high or intoxicated. This is not a productive dynamic for a conversation. So maybe just mark it and then have the discussion the next morning or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. And as you said, it's acknowledging, you know, because if they've been drinking or if they've been vaping, you know, you talked about cross addiction, and so important. It's about saying, well, you know, why were you doing that? You know, do you want to share with me what that was about? And acknowledging that, you know, that it's legal. However, you know, you measure it, we're adults, we can control it, your brain's different and all of this. So I think there are certain ways to bring it up as well. So yeah, good question. I hope that's given people some tips. And Priscilla's just asking, and maybe one for me to answer, is about we've heard illegal drugs are readily available near school, in the basketball court in Cyberport, the park on Bowen Road. And Michael, you'll be picking some things up, I'm sure. I mean, Priscilla, you know, gosh, in any city, you can find substances. You can, and information we sent out to parents, young people can put a code into Instagram to connect with someone to get substances. So it's there. I think this is a whole conversation in itself about, I think you should be warning your children. I think you should be talking about, like Michael said, having a script prepared, you know, talking about people that may approach your child who seem really friendly, maybe offer a sample of something, they're with someone else, or a friend of a friend says, oh, this person we know is able to get us this. So I think you should be opening the discussion up. Maybe you don't want to use the word warning in the conversation, but you know, maybe it's looking at the risks and keeping safe. So yeah, there are many places within Hong Kong, I think, and in any parts of the world. It's about having the right boundaries in place for your child, making sure that they are equipped with what to say, and knowing where your child is and who they're with. You know, hanging out at Cyberport or somewhere in a park in Bowen Road for 3 hours, personally, I think is probably a recipe for some possible risky behaviour. So I think, you know, maybe them going out for a meal somewhere, or, you know, going to play some sports together is far more productive than not doing anything for a few hours, which in your acronym again, if you're bored, you know, you might get more tempted.
Well, and these dealers are very savvy, and they will target the kids maybe at different schools, or there's the idea that perhaps you know, these people will have cash on them or something like that, and dealers will target that. and create, so the kids know where all the spots are. And they even have arrangements where they sort of will drop off and exchange, you know, substances in a particular bush or something like that. And so they don't, and kids are savvy as well. So they have gotten to the point where maybe they don't bring substances into their home, which they shouldn't do, because that could affect you as parents as well if you're caught with, you know, illegal substances. So kids have places where they hide things or where they put things, and it's a whole system. And you know, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I just know that, like Claire was saying, it's not necessarily, is it Cyberport or here or there? It's just anywhere they can work this out, no matter where they live, right? So it's more about just preparing them and educating them about these substances and about how, you know, just sort of so they can be informed about the dangers and the consequences. Because again, teenagers don't really think about the consequences. Certainly not for you as parents. If they're bringing,
Exactly.
you know, you can't bring these substances into our home. I could lose my work visa. So kids aren't thinking about that, but we need to maybe not warn them, but just have these conversations.
That's it, because it's not a particular child that's going to get involved. You know, it's a group that young person's hanging around with, and you know, it's just making our children feel prepared and ready and confident, as you said, to be able to say no. So having a script, having something to be able to say, you know, I can't because of you know, like you say, we've got the voluntary drugs program. We can't because our school's got the voluntary drugs program, like I know some other schools have, or I can't because of this. So I think some conversations like that are very important. We've not got any more questions, Michael. So I think people probably have finished their lunch and are ready to go back to work.
Yeah, right. I see some thing about vaping.
So VJ, I understand, how can we support our children through this new kind of smoking? I think vaping, I think the slides that you put up on vaping were really pertinent at the moment, because I think all parents would say they've seen an increase, the fact that they're very small, it can be hidden in your pocket, things like that. They're in all these flavors. These manufacturers are very, very careful. And it's from a parent, by the way. Thank you, VJ. So I've been hearing a lot about vaping amongst younger children these days. I understand it may not be at the same level of alarm as narcotics, but how can we support our children through this new kind of smoking?
It may not be the same level of alarm, but as I said, you know, nicotine, an addiction on a teenage brain, sets up this brain to be an addicted brain as an adult. So it is quite alarming, because addiction is a form of learning, and the brain as an adolescent is learning to be addicted, learning to be an addicted brain through nicotine. And so the drug companies are targeting the kids with these bubblegum flavor, you know, or peach or watermelon flavor. So I think, you know, as I said, letting the kids know that you're being gullible, you're being taken for a fool by these tobacco companies that are sitting around making tons of money and laughing that are getting you addicted so you can be, you know, so, you know, whatever way, maybe I'm being a bit too descriptive, but anyway, but something like that, right? Because they want to know, kids don't want to be taken advantage of or being, other people are making money or profiting off of them.
Yeah, they don't. They are savvy like that. You're absolutely right. And you know, whilst people might not perceive it's the same level of alarm, it's like you said, it lights up that dopamine, it starts that feeling of being addicted, and then you can see patterns. I've seen it in young people. I've been, you know, doing the job a long time, and I'm not talking about just this school, I'm talking about teenagers in general here. That, you know, it can start with vaping, and then there's a cross addiction which can then move to alcohol, and then it can move to marijuana, etc. So it can be the start of a path, and needs to be nipped in the bud very quickly. Okay, Michael, I know you are back to work very soon.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate your time, and I hope we can have some other sessions with you, hopefully next year, if you're up for it, to chat.
Sure.
With you. That would be
I love
great.
to talk to the teenagers as well. Those kind of discussions I think are quite well received and so helpful, because we need to, they're the ones who need to learn the scripts and things like that, right?
Yeah, and I thank you from a parent there for you, Michael. Yeah, and thanks parents for giving up your lunchtime too and joining us. Okay, we'll leave it there.
I just want to remind the parents to message me, email me questions or concerns, because it's a sensitive topic, so sometimes people don't want to air it publicly. So my email is private. Of course, feel free to follow up. Great.
Thanks, Michael. And same for us if you want to reach out to school as well. Happy Friday, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well done.